Well, welcome to another dose of science. And COVID is still with us, of course, but it is being kind of pushed to the back burner because of what is happening in the Ukraine. We're going from maybe the frying pan into the fire. We'll see. Anyway, we've got an interesting program lined up for you today. You're going to learn about mothballs, hear also about some quackery. We always like to emphasize that. And I'm going to get the ball rolling here with what I hope is a very interesting story, and one that I actually was not all that familiar with. So let's get going. We're going back to 1858. And at that time, if you wanted to send a message from Europe to America or vice versa, it took about 2 weeks, because the only way you had to do that was by ship. There was absolutely no other means. 2 weeks was a long time to get a message across. Now, within America and within Europe, telegraph had already been introduced, because back in 1844, Samuel Morse came up with the telegraph, which was a remarkable invention, where you could send messages by tapping on this instrument in Morse code. It would take a long time because each word had to be carefully spelled out, but nevertheless, the message could be sent. And in 1844, Morse sent the first message from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, and it was an interesting and rather cryptic message. It said, "What hath God wrought?" Well, it wasn't God that did it. It was Morse who did it. And within about 20 years, North America was crisscrossed with telegraph wires. There were about 44,000 miles of wire already by about 1864. However, to put a wire across the ocean, that was a huge challenge. First of all, of course, the wire had to be specially manufactured. It had to be encased in some sort of cable to withstand the pressure and all of the other atrocities that the sea could unleash on a wire. But in 1858, the first attempt was made. And it was made by two ships, the USS Niagara and the HMS Agamemnon, British ship, and they met in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. They were each carrying cable, but neither had the capacity to carry enough cable to lay all the way from Ireland to Newfoundland. They had half the distance, each one. So they met in the middle of the Atlantic, they joined the cables, and then they took off in different directions. One went towards Ireland, one went towards Newfoundland. And they managed to put down the cable. Now, that cable was very, very interesting in its design. The active part was a set of copper wires on the inside, and that was coated with Guttapercha. Now, Guttapercha is a material very similar to rubber. It comes from a tree, and you can see the copper wires in the middle coated with Guttapercha. Around it are some steel wires, and then another coating of Guttapercha. Now, the Guttapercha is a tree, and you make an incision in the tree, and this latex can be collected. It was a very, very useful material back in the late 1800s. Believe it or not, this is what golf balls were made of in those days. And today, of course, golf balls are much, much more sophisticated than the Guttapercha balls, but this is a historic item. Today, Guttapercha still has one very, very interesting use. It is used in endodontics. If you ever have the misfortune of needing a root canal, the dentist will clean out the root and use these little needles to make sure that there is no remnant of any bacteria in there, and then fill the root with Guttapercha. And that can be seen on an X-ray like this. So it is still today a very useful material. And when you get a root canal, the smell that you will notice is the smell of the burning Guttapercha, because it has to be heated so that it flows into the root canals. Very interesting in terms of molecular structure. Natural rubber, which comes from the rubber tree, chemically is almost identical to Guttapercha. The difference is in something we call stereochemistry, the three-dimensional arrangement of the atoms. And if you just take a look at the carbon-carbon double bond, you can see that the chain that extends in both directions in natural rubber is on the same side of the two carbon atoms. So this is called the cis configuration, whereas in Guttapercha, it's on opposite sides, and that's the trans configuration. This will alter the properties of the substance. But in the late 1800s, Guttapercha was a much sought-after material, so much so that it was even featured on some trading cards. In those days, Liebig's meat extract was a very, very popular product. And its sales were boosted because these cards depicting all sorts of interesting things in life, some from the world of art, some from the world of science, these were collectible things. And here is one of those cards that actually shows Guttapercha being harvested from the tree. So anyway, in 1858, they managed to lay this cable, and the first message was sent by Queen Victoria. And the message went to the United States, to president, and the message was very, very interesting, very, it was a congratulatory message to President James Buchanan on the completion of this marvelous, cable, and 98 words. That's all it was that Queen Victoria sent, but it took 16 hours to send that message. But nevertheless, this was a huge event because it no longer took 2 weeks to send a message across the pond. It could just take several minutes. There was much celebration in the US. The next day in New York, there was a parade where they actually paraded part of the first transatlantic cable through the streets. At night, there were fireworks. The city was illuminated. Flags flew. Unfortunately, the mirth didn't last very long because 3 weeks later, the cable failed. And it took another 8 years until a new cable could be laid. So that takes us to 1866, when the SS Great Eastern was outfitted as a cable laying ship. This at that time was the largest ship that had ever been built. It had a capacity of 4,000 passengers. It was a passenger ship before it was given this task. And it was a giant paddle wheeler, of course, fueled by coal and steam. But as you can see, it also had sails. So the large salons of the ship were refitted to hold the cable that was to be laid. And obviously, it was a great deal of work, but they managed to do it. They sailed from Ireland to Newfoundland and laid the first transatlantic cable. And by this time, the messages could be sent more quickly. There had been improvements in the intervening 8 years. And the logo here was 2 weeks to 2 minutes, because what used to take 2 weeks crossing the ocean now took 2 minutes, although usually it took longer than that. It's also interesting to note that this was a telegraph cable, and it took almost another 100 years until the first telephone cable was laid across the Atlantic Ocean. This, of course, was a much more sophisticated cable than the original one. And it was, again, a copper wire in the middle, but it was protected by plastic, it was protected by metals. And this was quite a manufacturing feat. Here is the machine that was used to make the cable. The cable then was piled on a ship, and it was dragged across the ocean. A lot of manpower involved there, and finally arrived in Newfoundland. And here are the workers dragging it out from the ocean onto Newfoundland. And for the first time, a cable, a telephone cable, connected America and Europe. Now, you would think that these seabed cables are a historic relic of the past. That's what I used to think. I never thought any more about this. Turns out that this is not the case. Today, there are some 380 cables, 1.2 million kilometers, crisscrossing all of the oceans of the world. And in fact, this is what the internet is based on. We think it's in the cloud. That cloud is actually at the bottom of the ocean. And these cables obviously are miracles of modern technology. And instead of a copper wire, it's optical fiber that is embedded in layers of plastic, includes polycarbonate, includes mylar, polyethylene, and steel wiring. And this is at the bottom of many, many seas and oceans. And this is what links all of the world together. That's how the internet functions. And these days, it's quite worrisome because disruption of any of these cables can disrupt the internet. And we know that there is a potential risk here. Putin's submarines have certainly been seen patrolling above these cables. And it is very clear, it is well known, that those Russian submarines have the ability to disrupt all sorts of underwater cables. They can actually release mini subs that can go down, and they have this technology. Now, undoubtedly, the US has this technology as well. And so this is one of the concerns that is being raised now, if there should be an escalation of this conflict. So there you have the story of the first transatlantic cable and how it has been transformed to be the carrier of the internet. And of course, so much of our life depends around that.
Joe, well, where does a beluga whale do it?
I don't think that it's been enlisted by the Russians. I think it just shows that the depth to which the whales can go, unless it's a mini submarine masquerading as a whale. Don't know.
Natural camouflage.
Yeah. So, this, what can we say? This is a concerning issue. So there it is, a little bit of history. And now we'll get back to more modern times. We'll switch to Jonathan and hear a little bit of some entertaining quackery.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Sayer Ji. And to attempt to answer the question of, can he guide us through the scientific literature? And the reason why I'm asking this question is that people watching this may be familiar with this website called GreenMedInfo. If you have not used it yourself, you may have seen screenshots of it or links to it shared with you on Facebook or through email. It is a website that is very beautifully put together, and it pretends to give you to empower you with the power of the scientific literature, the biomedical scientific literature specifically, so that you can search it for whatever ails you and find answers in the body of research. So for example, this is a screenshot of GreenMedInfo. There's a search box, and you can type in allergies, and then you see there are different subcategories. So if you think you may have a wheat allergy, you can click on that. And what you get is this kind of web page. And on the left, if you pay him money, you can further refine your search. In the middle, you see it found 106 abstracts with summaries of research papers on wheat allergy, and you can filter them, you can sort through them. And then on the right, you have these articles that Sayer Ji has written that are available to you on his website about this topic that you're interested in. And so if you click on one of these particular abstracts, this is what you get from GreenMedInfo. You get the title of the abstract, when it was published and where, who the authors are. You can read the summary of the research and see what kind of study this was. It was a human study. So, on its surface, this looks like a very useful tool. And I'm sometimes asked by people, like, where can I go to access the scientific literature so that I can read it and search through it. And this positions itself as a user-friendly tool to do just that. Right. And so, we should always ask ourselves, like, what is this source that I'm consulting? Who is behind it? What are they looking for? What do they want? Are they qualified? So the man behind GreenMedInfo is Sayer G. As I mentioned, this is what he looks like. If you look him up, you will see that he is often portrayed as a thought leader in the natural health and wellness fields. He's the editor of a journal on nutrition and medicine. He's the vice chair of a health federation, and he's a member of the steering committee of a global coalition. Now, if we put on our little skeptical hat on and we take a deeper look at these claims, they start to fall apart. So, this idea that he's a thought leader in the natural health and wellness fields, I mean, anyone can be called a thought leader, right? It doesn't require any qualification. I could refer to myself as a thought leader if I wanted to. Nobody's going to arrest me. No regulatory body is going to reprimand me. So it's a bit of a meaningless term. Natural health usually means alternative medicine, right, which uses unproven or disproven products based around this appeal to nature. So if it's natural, it must be good for you. If it's synthetic, it must be bad for you. We know that is not as simple as that. And wellness, of course, is this catch-all term that contains some useful interventions, but also all sorts of nonsense. So far, it's very, self-promotional, but it doesn't really mean much.
Is that his real name?
As far as I know, yes. So he is the editor of a journal on nutrition and medicine. What is this? Well, it's the International Journal of Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine. It published one issue a year until 2019, and then it stopped. There are over 20,000 academic journals in existence. Anyone can start one, so that's not very impressive to me. This health federation is called the National Health Federation, which, again, it sounds very impressive. It appears to be a lobby group. Their website lists petitions to get Big Pharma out of the FDA and to help repeal Obamacare. It has a magazine called Health Freedom News, and we've heard health freedom a lot during the pandemic. It has ads for mineral supplements and magnetic sleep pads and systemic pet detox products, all kinds of nonsense. And this global coalition that he's a member of, it's called the Global GMO-Free Coalition. I'll give you one guess as to what it is that they are against. Now, this is important because, as I will show very soon, GreenMedInfo does not give you access to every paper that has ever been published on a particular topic. There is curation that is happening there. And curation in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. There's so much information out there, it needs to be curated. But we should ask ourselves, who is doing the curation on GreenMedInfo? Are they qualified to look at the biomedical literature and to decide what is relevant and what isn't? So who is Sayer G? Is he a medical doctor? Is he a scientist? What is his background? And it turns out that he has a bachelor's degree in philosophy. So, the biomedical literature is very complex. Even papers written in a field that is sort of next to what I have studied, like molecular biology, is already a bit of a challenge to interpret correctly. If I read a paper in physics, it's complete gibberish to me because I'm not a physicist. And so we are to assume that this guy who has a bachelor's degree in philosophy is capable of accurately and objectively curating the biomedical scientific literature, which is a very, very big stretch. I'll give you an example. So on the left, I went on PubMed, which is sort of like the Google of the biomedical scientific literature, and I searched for homeopathy for allergic rhinitis. So when your nose is running because of allergies, there have been papers looking to see if homeopathy might work or not. And when I do this search on PubMed, I get 68 results. And the first one is this review article. It's a systematic review of all the evidence that's been published. And this shows up. Now, when I go to, on the right, when I go to Sayer G's GreenMedInfo and I look just for allergic rhinitis in general, and I look at the review articles that it has, this review paper that I found on PubMed is not there. It's not in the list, even though it came out in 2017 and the first hit is a 2017 paper. There's a 2020 paper. There's a paper on a homeopathic and a conventional nasal spray produced equivalent improvements in nasal and ocular symptoms. It sounds very positive. And I wonder if the reason why this review article is not featured on GreenMedInfo is because the conclusion of that review article is that the overall quality of the evidence is low or uncertain. And so we can't draw any kind of firm conclusion about the use of homeopathy for allergic rhinitis. So basically, either it doesn't work or we just can't know if it works or not. And so it's a bit of a negative result. And somehow it just doesn't find itself on GreenMedInfo. And that seems to be what's happening with GreenMedInfo because of its bias towards natural products. Whatever makes natural health products look like they work and they are safe will make its way into GreenMedInfo, and whatever is negative will conveniently not be put in GreenMedInfo. And to add to another layer to this, so there's this report called the Disinformation Dozen that was put together by the Center for Countering Digital Hate, which basically found out that the majority of the disinformation about the COVID-19 vaccines actually comes from about 12 people. And so what happens is you've got these 12 super spreaders at the top. They regularly, like on a daily basis, they throw out all kinds of falsehoods about the COVID vaccines, and that trickles down to their very large audiences who then share it with their friends and their colleagues and their family members, and that's how this spreads. And so they are responsible for the majority of this disinformation. And would you look at that, who is there at the top? Oh, it's Sayer G. Yeah, he is one of those disinformation dozen people. So what they did, what the Center for Countering Digital Hate did, is that they took a sample of anti-vax, essentially propaganda that was being shared on Facebook and Twitter, a total of 812,000 times between February and mid-March 2021. And they showed that about 2/3 of that anti-vaccine content is attributable to these 12 people. One of them is Sayer G. At the time, he was still active on Facebook. I just had a look yesterday. Facebook did not take him down. He still has a Facebook profile, but he says that he is no longer using Facebook, and he's now on Telegram, and more on that later. He was removed from Twitter, and he was completely removed from Instagram. He was suspended in April 2021. And I'll show you a few examples of the kinds of things that Sayer G used to spread on these mainstream social media platforms before he got banned. So here is a quote from allegedly from some Israeli researchers that conclude that the Pfizer vaccine for the elderly killed during the 5-week vaccination period about 40 times more people than the disease itself would have killed, which is complete nonsense. It's absolutely not true. They are using the threat of a vaccine passport to fool you into submitting to quote unquote vaccination without sufficient quote unquote vaccine uptake. The idea of a quote unquote vaccine passport is completely unworkable. Of course, he doesn't believe that it's actually a vaccine. No, it's genetic engineering. And then one last one here. I refuse to participate in a medical conspiracy that says wearing a mask is healthy and we all pretend healthy people are ill and can make us all sick. He posted this on Instagram and got almost 6,000 likes, including from David Avocado Wolf, who is another spreader of misinformation, who wrote, "Amen, what a total abomination." So I mentioned Telegram, and Telegram, if you're not familiar with it, is this sort of alternative social media platform that has been adopted by a lot of people who have been banned from things like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So you have a lot of far-right reactionaries and anti-vaccine activists who are on Telegram. These are the two profiles. So there's GreenMedInfo, that's on Instagram, 52,600 subscribers. Sayer G himself has his own channel there. And I'll show you a few of the things that have been spread on Telegram by the GreenMedInfo channel. So here's a smiling little baby, and the caption reads, "Living your best life, knowing you survived a quote-unquote deadly pandemic." Right? So he doesn't believe the pandemic was actually deadly. "With no masks, tests, experimental jabs, and your God-given DNA fresh like the day you were born." Because again, it's this false idea that the vaccines will rewrite your DNA. And so this baby is very happy because his DNA has not been altered in any way, which was a complete misunderstanding of epigenetics and how the genetic code changes as we just live our lives. Here's another ad for a series of episodes called COVID Secrets, talking about the infamous VAERS database and all the things, the bad things that the vaccine is alleged to have caused. Here's an ad for a global energy healing summit taking place very soon. And what surprised me was this particular post here. It is for a website called besovereign.com. And when you go back to Sayurji's profile, you will see that he is not only the founder of GreenMedInfo, but also of this website called BeSovereign.com. And this is for a specific live stream that is happening, so a live video stream with somebody who is saying that he did not comply with the Cootie mandate and that the science is not to be trusted. And I was wondering, what is this Be Sovereign thing? Because we are seeing, as I'm sure many of our viewers know, the anti-vaccine movement is very, very sticky, and it has allied itself with a lot of other groups during the pandemic who likewise don't like the public health measures. And that includes people who are very much opposed to the government to the point where they want to become sovereign citizens. They don't want to obey the law of the land, and they want to be their own country in a way. And so when you go to BeSovereign.com, this is what I saw. They were about to go live with David Icke. And for those of you who don't know, David Icke is the granddaddy of grand conspiracy theories. And so basically, you can start on a website like GreenMedInfo with the purest of intentions of just wanting to do your own research and not knowing who is behind GreenMedInfo. And if you like this website and you start to follow Sayurji on Telegram, you can, just in a few clicks, you end up watching a live stream with David Icke, who believes that there are shape-shifting reptilian hybrid races that are in charge, that are the Illuminati, and they're secretly in charge of the world. So, when we talk about the rabbit hole, that's what this is that you can start with something that sounds just like, well, I'm a little bit, I'm not a big fan of the pharmaceutical industry. I'm looking for like natural treatments that have no side effects. And you can very quickly go down the rabbit hole and be exposed to these ideas that Hillary Clinton is secretly a reptilian alien in disguise who is controlling the world and what have you. So that's what I had for you. So hopefully our viewers will see Sayurji in a slightly different light now.
Is Putin also a reptile?
I don't know. I have not kept up with with David Icke's Ukraine/Russia conspiracy theories, but they must be pretty out there.
You know what's very interesting about people like Sayurji is how someone like this, who's a scientific nobody, can rise to the level of being influential that he has. I mean, at least you look at people like Joe Mercola and Sherry Tenpenny and even Judy Mikovits. I mean, at least they can point to having some scientific education. But this guy is just nothing. He's a scientific vacuum, and yet he's got this influence. It's this fascinating social phenomenon how this happens.
Yeah, well, he looks the part, and he has a beautiful looking website, and that really helps.
Yeah, I was going to say a beautiful looking website and a beautiful looking face go a long way to get people to your cause. It is not an accident that he's so handsome.
So then, Ada, you should make a webpage.
Oh, thanks. You can already go to it. It's called adamcbean.com. I'm kidding. Go to mcgill.ca/OSS.
All right. Mothballs.
Yeah, mothballs. Kind of a weird topic, kind of one that came to me out of nowhere, to be honest. I've been reading quite a bit of Jane Austen literature the past couple months, and I read a few references to mothballs, and that got me thinking that those aren't really a thing anymore. People don't really use mothballs anymore.
I have to say I did grow up with mothballs.
Okay, well,
they were used in our house.
You're jumping the gun, Jonathan. One more slide.
Sorry.
One more slide, and I was going to ask if you have ever used mothballs, because I did a quick poll on my Twitter, and most people have not. I also did a very informal poll around my lab group, and besides the one aged 60 plus postdoc, none of us had ever bought them, used them. We knew they existed, but they're not something we're familiar with.
I used to use a lot of mothballs because I used to do the demo of the bouncing mothball up and down in solution, when you vinegar and baking soda and you generate CO2 and the mothballs will bounce.
It's similar to the raisin, right?
Similar to the raisin, same exact thing.
Yeah.
So I used to do that.
All right. Well, so maybe for people a little closer to my age, mothballs are more of like a hypothetical thing that exists. Maybe your grandparents might have some, you know, the smell, you associate it with like thrift stores, but they're not really a household thing. So to start at the basics, they are not a ball made of moths. They are in fact a small pellet made of various chemicals that are not necessarily balls at all. And they function as pest repellents and pesticides. So what that actually means is that kill pests and repel them, so stop them from getting there in the first place. Prior to the 50s, mothballs were mostly naphthalene based. And so naphthalene is this cool little double ring looking molecule. It is hydrocarbon based, meaning that it's produced from coal tar, and it is extremely flammable. So that is not typically something that you would love to have around your precious clothing that you are trying to protect from moths because you love it so much. So it's also a fairly potent carcinogen, amongst the other things wrong with it. So
luckily, I was using it before it was a carcinogen.
Oh, okay, good. I wouldn't want that for you. More modern mothballs are now made of 1,4-dichlorobenzene, also called parachlorobenzene, also called PCB. And they're less flammable, although still flammable, if we're being honest. And they are still hydrocarbon based. And they are still a carcinogen, although a less potent one. So we've made...
Can I ask you to define a hydrocarbon for our audience?
Yes, a hydrocarbon is a molecule made of only hydrogens and carbons. They're exclusively sourced from petrochemicals. So from oil, from coal, from tar, from things that are not good for the environment in general.
There are other natural hydrocarbons like terpenes in trees, for example.
It's true.
So there are
they do tend to be the exceptions rather than the rule, though, right?
Yeah. No, I mean there are a lot of terpene-like compounds, and also, it depends on where you draw the line. If you're looking at alkaloids, which may have one nitrogen in the molecule, is it really a hydrocarbon or not? But no, I mean, if you're really looking at only carbon and hydrogen, mostly they are petroleum based or coal based, of course. I mean, things the diamond or graphite, right? Those are hydrocarbons.
Yeah. So I mean, hydrocarbon based, that's less important. The most important part is that both of these chemicals sublimate, which means that they go from being solid to being gas. So that's actually, there's a few ways you might have experienced that phenomenon in your real life, but in Canada, my favorite version is that on a nice, warm, sunny winter day, snow won't just melt. A certain amount of the snow goes directly to gas. It sublimates, which is really cool. And if you've ever wondered why the snow is going away, but your lawn isn't totally drenched, it's because a certain amount of the snow is sublimating. So why all the moth hate? I think they're kind of cute. I think all animals are kind of cute. That's just me. So mothballs are meant to repel the, I don't even want to try to say this one. Jonathan?
I would say Tiniola bissaliella. I can't even. Bissaliella. Tiniola bissaliella. Or TB for short.
Well, the common clothing moth. Let's go with that. And the common clothing moth is a problem because the larvae or caterpillars of this species feed on natural fibers of all kinds. So that is cotton, linen, silk, wool, fur, and even synthetic fibers that are blended with natural ones. So even if your sweater is a cotton, wool, or acrylic blend, they can still munch on it. So how does a ball kill a moth? It is not by rolling over it like Indiana Jones. As I've said, mothballs of either formulation sublimate, so they go from solid to gas. So if you place them in a sealed container, the gases will build up because they have nowhere to go. First, to a level that will discourage the moths and the larvae from coming towards it, And eventually, once they're there for a while, they will build up the gas to a point that it's lethal to the larva. So that even if the moths have already gotten in there and they've already laid their eggs and the eggs have already hatched, the larva can be killed by the gases. The problem is that these gases are also toxic to us and our pets. And they kind of function by building up, but that's exactly what you don't want them to do in terms of your safety. They can result in kidney damage and red blood cell damage, and also have really diffuse neurologic issues. This especially has implications because mothballs can sometimes be a inhalant drug. It's not very common, but the neurologic symptoms can be made even worse by withdrawal. So it's not good to start. It's really damaging while you're doing it, and then it's even worse when you try to stop. So don't go anywhere near huffing those. I think they stink anyways. ERs need to be able to quickly differentiate between the two different kinds of mothballs, because if a kid has swallowed one or a dog has swallowed one or you've inhaled too much of it, they need to give you different treatment depending on what it's made of. So there's a few really interesting tests that have been designed to be really simple so that they can be done in emergency departments with what's on hand. So you can try to dissolve the mothballs in turpentine. The parachlorobenzene ones dissolve, the naphthalene don't. You can crush it up and put a little bit of it on like the end of a wire and stick it in a flame, like a Bunsen burner or a candle. The parachlorobenzene produces a green flame, whereas the other one produces just normal yellow flames. And you can try to melt them because parachlorobenzene melts at 53 versus naphthalene at 80. There are also non-moth related uses. Not a lot of them. That's probably why you haven't heard a lot about mothballs. If they had some unique, amazing function, we probably would be using them more. But once upon a time, they were a gasoline additive, of all things. Modern gasolines have octane ratings that are around 85 to 90, depending what quality of gas you buy. But in the 1920s, the octane rating of most gas was around 20 to 40, or 40 to 60 rather. So not very high at all. And adding naphthalene-based mothballs to gasoline could increase the octane rating because they are hydrocarbons. They are fundamentally the same types of molecules that make up gas.
What is an octane rating?
An octane rating can probably be better defined by Joe.
Well, the octane actually refers to 2,2,4-trimethylpentane, which is a compound that burns extremely well in the gasoline engine. And all of the gasolines are compared to that. So you give the octane rating of 100 to something that burns really well, like the 2,2,4-trimethylpentane. And then in combustion experiments, you measure the amount of energy that is given out per volume of all the other gasolines, and you compare it to octane, and that's how you get the octane rating. And given what's happening with gas prices now, we may be adding naphthalene to our gas tanks again.
I would not recommend that because, well, it used to increase the octane rating of gas. It doesn't anymore. Don't do this. Do not do this. Please don't do this, because now well, for one, mothballs are not really made of naphthalene often anymore. They're made of parachlorobenzene, and parachlorobenzene will precipitate in your gas tank and then clog up your gas tank. Precipitate meaning it'll be a liquid and then it will fall out of solution. It will become a solid, and those little grains will get all up in your engine, and it's not a good idea. It also just wouldn't increase the octane rating anymore because we have such high octane, such optimized gas already. Some people also use mothballs as snake, squirrel, mouse, bat, rat, chipmunk, whatever other rodent or pest you want to insert here to repel them. They don't work, and in fact, they're dangerous to you, to wildlife, to your pets. Don't do it. But also in studies, they just don't work. Mothballs don't even work on other species of moths. They basically only work on this one specific species. So I don't know about you, but my takeaway from learning about mothballs was I'm never touching mothballs. They seem dangerous. They seem unnecessary. And given how my clothes nowadays are mostly made from synthetic acrylic materials, they just seem unnecessary. But nonetheless, if you're careful, modern mothballs can absolutely be used safely. But there are also alternatives. So cedar wood works pretty well, but only for a limited time. And that's because the actual ingredient in the cedar that's helping is the cedar oil. And the cedar oil, it's volatile. It kind of comes out of the cedar, goes into the air, and in the same type of way, it creates like a gas and it repels the bugs. But eventually, all of the oil has vaporized and there's no more in there to repel them. So you can buy cedar oil, you can use it on its own, or you can use it to refresh spent. There are also clothing moth traps, which are sticky traps baited with artificial pheromones. And for clothing, the best methods, as tested by scientists and by bloggers and different organizations that have tried to put this to the test through the years, they found that actually putting clothes in dryers or direct sunshine about once a month is just as effective, if not more so, than using mothballs or other alternatives to try to keep the moths away and then kill pests. By doing it about once a month, you ensure that they never, even if the bugs got in there the day after you do your dryer treatment, they have at most 1 month to munch away. And by doing this heat treatment, you are killing all of the ones that are there. And by shaking them out or vacuuming them, you are making sure to remove any dead bodies, dead eggs, and also live eggs. And if clothing moths are a big issue for you, then consider buying fewer natural fiber items of clothing. I know that there are many, many reasons that people choose different fibers of clothing, from preferences to needs based on weather and humidity and people's beliefs about the environment and about veganism and many, many, many factors. But this is just one more factor to add to the list. If clothing moths are a really big issue for you, you probably don't want to buy a fancy wool sweater. Whatever you do, don't bother trying to freeze them unless you can get your textiles below -23 and leave them there for at least an hour, because that in studies is what it took to deactivate the eggs. And even for Canada, that's really cold. So in summary, mothballs are pellets of parachlorobenzene. They sublimate from a solid to a gas that kills moths and their larvae. They can be really dangerous to humans or pets if handled or inhaled. They should only ever be used in sealed containers or packages. Don't put them in your garden. Don't put them open in your closet. Don't put them in an open bag full of clothing. Sealed containers, ideally airtight. And mothballs have largely fallen out of use because we have better sealed homes. We have more synthetic materials. And in general, we don't put textiles into long-term storage in the way that people would in the past. I don't know about you guys, but growing up, I had a completely separate winter and summer wardrobe. And somewhere in the fall and spring, I would do like a total swap out. And now I just have clothes and I wear them all year round. And I don't have a dedicated winter wardrobe in the same way that used to be so popular. And as well, we don't see as many like tapestries and carpets being put into long-term storage. In general, storage techniques are getting better. And so we don't need mothballs anymore.
Very good. All right, flood of information that has come your way today. We learned something about the transatlantic cable, also about Sayer G's nonsense. And we also found out that mothballs are not the sex organs of male moths. All right, so that's it for today. We'll be back with you 1 month from now, if the world is still in one piece. All right, thanks for listening and watching.
Bye.